At 4:20 a.m. today, reports began circulating that Ukraine had launched a series of coordinated strikes, dismantling a cornerstone of Russia's wartime alliances. What started as whispers in defense circles quickly turned into breaking news. A $5 billion defense and logistics agreement between Moscow and its regional partners had collapsed overnight. For the Kremlin, once proud of its expansive network of allies, this was a severe blow, a pivotal moment that signified a major turning point in the ongoing war. The rapid collapse of Russia's external support network reveals a critical vulnerability that had been slowly unraveling. For months, the Kremlin had poured resources into strengthening partnerships with nations offering logistical, material, and intelligence support. This network, valued at $5 billion, was seen as a buffer against the growing pressure from Western sanctions and military isolation. But today, that buffer disintegrated. This breakdown didn't happen overnight. It was the result of months of calculated military actions by Ukraine. To understand the significance of what transpired, we need to look at the nature of Russia's so-called war alliance, forged in late 2023. It was a loose coalition of economic and military partners, stretching from Eastern Europe to parts of Central Asia and the Middle East. These nations weren't official allies, but many benefited from Russian energy subsidies, arms deals, and intelligence sharing. Moscow had worked to cultivate these relationships, creating the illusion of a broad coalition capable of defying Western influence. However, the alliance was never as solid as Russia believed. As Ukraine's counteroffensive gained momentum earlier this year, it began targeting Russian supply lines extending beyond its borders. Precision strikes, aided by Western technologies and satellite intelligence, put immense pressure on Russia's logistical capabilities. Key areas like the Black Sea, Belarusian corridors, and Caucasus trade routes were systematically targeted. These were not just military operations. They were designed to economically and logistically isolate Russia from its external partners. Today's strikes, however, were the final blow. According to defense briefings, these operations were the result of meticulous planning aimed at severing Russia's dependence on its most valuable wartime partners. Depots, transport hubs, and communication nodes linked to the alliance's infrastructure were destroyed. By dawn, officials reported multiple assets disabled or destroyed, leaving Russia's supply routes crippled and its partners scrambling to comprehend the full scale of the damage. Among the most significant losses was an energy logistics corridor connecting Russian oil reserves to Allied territories in Central Asia. This corridor had served as a vital lifeline for Russia's trade, bypassing Western sanctions. Ukrainian drone strikes reportedly disabled at least 2 key transfer stations, halting shipments of fuel and military components worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Satellite images confirmed massive fires continuing for hours, signaling the scale of the destruction. Simultaneously, Ukrainian cyber units launched an assault on communication systems tied to Russia's Middle Eastern partners, supplying precision munitions. Within minutes, these networks were rendered useless, further isolating Moscow's resupply routes. This synchronized blend of kinetic and digital warfare shows Ukraine's growing sophistication in combining military precision with intelligence gathering. By mid-morning, the political fallout became apparent. At least one partner suspended a defense contract, and another froze cooperation on their commitments. A Central Asian government suspended its defense contract with Moscow, citing security uncertainties. Another government in Eastern Europe froze military cooperation with Russia. What had once been a well-oiled machine of cooperative states was beginning to unravel. Experts are calling this one of Russia's most severe diplomatic setbacks since the early stages of the invasion. The $5 billion alliance, once presented by Moscow as proof of its global influence, has now become a liability. Countries that had once aligned with Russia were now distancing themselves, fearing the geopolitical consequences of continued cooperation. The speed of the collapse raises questions. Why did this alliance fall apart so quickly? The answer lies not only in Ukraine's military strategy, but also in the shifting global perception of Russia's war. Nations that initially sought economic or political gain through cooperation with Russia now find that the risks outweigh the benefits. Diplomatic pressure, the threat of sanctions, and domestic opposition are taking their toll. Ukraine, by contrast, has used its growing technological edge to expose vulnerabilities in Russia's network. Combining military successes with strategic information campaigns, Kyiv has systematically undermined Russia's credibility. Ukraine's intelligence leaks, satellite imagery, and diplomatic outreach have been critical in weakening Russia's alliances. Ukraine's technological advantage, supported by Western partners, has reshaped the war's dynamics. While Russia relied on brute force and intimidation, Ukraine has increasingly focused on precision, agility, and adaptability. Each strike not only disrupts Russian logistics, but sends a message to Russia's remaining allies. Supporting Moscow now comes at a high cost. Though Ukraine celebrated its tactical success privately, officials refrained from public triumph. President Zelensky's administration only acknowledged significant disruptions to hostile supply operations. But behind this restraint is quiet confidence. The fall of Russia's $5 billion alliance isn't just a military victory, but a symbolic one, showing that Ukraine's broader strategy of dismantling Moscow's influence is working. Back in Russia, state media initially tried to minimize the scale of the damage, calling it a temporary setback. But as images of burning depots and statements from anxious allied governments spread, the Kremlin's narrative began to falter. Independent analysts have called the event catastrophic, suggesting it could take months, if not longer, to restore the alliance. Financial analysts in Moscow predict ripple effects throughout the economy. With key export corridors severed and foreign contracts suspended, the ruble is expected to face renewed pressure. The economic consequences will be felt most in Russia's defense and energy sectors. Analysts are also closely monitoring signs of internal instability within the Kremlin as factions begin to question the sustainability of Putin's foreign policy. Today's operation marks a shift in the war's momentum. Ukraine's counteroffensive is no longer just about reclaiming territory, it's about isolating Russia. Each attack, each operation, and each disruption of alliances is part of a larger strategy to weaken Russia's ability to sustain conflict. The fall of the $5 billion alliance represents a crucial milestone. But even as Ukraine celebrates, it realizes Russia is far from finished. Moscow has a history of adapting under pressure, seeking new partners or covert channels to restore its capabilities. The next phase of the war will depend on how Russia responds, with resilience or desperation. As the day progressed, the global consequences became clear. EU and US officials struck a cautious tone, praising precision while urging restraint. They framed the event not just as a victory for Ukraine, but as a strategic unraveling of Putin's geopolitical structure. The ripple effects are already being felt, and the world's attention is focused on how the Kremlin will respond. In Moscow, uncertainty continues to grow. The Russian government is struggling to control the narrative. Inside the Kremlin, officials are divided over how to react. Some call for retaliation, while others urge restraint to prevent further alienation of Russia's remaining allies. The divisions within Putin's inner circle reflect a deeper crisis, one that extends beyond the military front. The geopolitical landscape is changing. What began as a well-coordinated alliance is now unraveling. The fall of the $5 billion network leaves Russia more isolated than ever. While Moscow tries to regroup, Ukraine's success shows that modern warfare extends beyond the battlefield. It's about dismantling the networks that sustain aggression, and it's clear that this strategy is beginning to work. As night falls across Eastern Europe, the full impact of today's events is becoming evident. Russia's network of regional partners, once bound by trade, energy, and military cooperation, is now fractured. What began as a precise operation by Ukraine has evolved into a geopolitical crisis that few could have predicted.